I'm Rob Crick, and my family's been involved with AGC ever since AGC started in Spokane. My grandpa was a contractor, my dad was a contractor, his brother, my uncle, three of them were contractors, and then I was for quite a while, and then I went to law school and I became an attorney, and what I do now is I'm an attorney for contractors. I'm a construction attorney. And so AGC has been part of my life ever since I was born. Construction has been all of my life ever since I was born. I went from Sacred Heart Hospital as a newborn down to Grand Coulee Dam to a little 8x30 mobile home, they call them now, trailer house, whatever you want to call them, that we lived in for my first 2 years on the South Dam job. So AGC and construction have been my whole life. Yeah, my grandpa was from a little holler in Tennessee. He was the youngest child of 14, and they were farmers. So my great-grandpa had this farm, and in order to get cheap hired hands, he had lots of kids. And in those days, at least there, you had to go to school through 6th grade. Then you could quit after that. And so all of his siblings got to 6th grade, dropped out of school. I mean, why would anybody go to school, for crying out loud? Well, anyway, comes Grandpa's time. He's the youngest. His mother stepped in and said, no, this is my baby. This is the last one. He's going through 8th grade. He's getting a diploma, like it or not. And so he did. And he graduated from the 8th grade. And you got to remember, in those days, there was not much mechanization. Everything was horses. The farming was all done with horses, and going to town was a horse and the buggy. And anyway, my grandpa's graduation present was a workhorse. And he thought, well, that's pretty cool, but I'll be damned if I'm going to stay here on this farm. And he left home. And he started working construction. In those days, they built roads with horses pulling what they call these Fresno scrapers and different equipment. And he just was naturally pretty good at it. And he had his horse, and he would contract himself out. There was hardly any employees in those days. Everybody worked as a contract employee, and you got paid by how much you did. So if he'd go out there and he'd move a load from the cut to the fill, building a road, he got paid so much per load. Well, he was pretty good at it, and he got to where he could do quite a bit. And eventually, pretty soon, he got enough money to where he could buy another horse. And so then he hired a guy to run his second horse, and then pretty soon he had 3 horses, and pretty soon he was contracting. Well, then he worked his way, he just kept working his way east. So from Tennessee, he just did jobs as they came up, wherever they might be. Ended up in Boise, and that's where he met my grandma. And they got married, and they were there for a while. That's where my dad was born, and they eventually came to Spokane. Well, so that's somewhere in the early 30s, and they decided that Spokane was a good place to just stop moving around. And by then, he had lots of employees and lots of work, and he could just be in the office, and he didn't have to be out there, whatever they do, driving a horse. I don't know what you do, teamstering a horse. And so he set up shop here, and that's about that time other contractors were getting together and setting up an AGC chapter. And so he and Neil Dagerstrom's dad, grandpa, I guess probably, and old Max Cuny 1, and a number of them set up a AGC chapter here. And in those days, the chapters were different. That was a heavy highway chapter, and there was also a building chapter that was separate. But my grandpa served as an officer in the chapter and was on the board for many years. And then as it went along, then my dad and my uncle came into the business with him, and they served on the board. And my uncle served as president in 1962, a year of real turmoil around here. And then came my turn, and I served 2 different times. I served on the board in the 70s, and then I served again in the 90s. As I got a little more wisdom, they invited me back, and then I served as legal counsel for the board for many years after that. So, AGC's just been a big part of our life, always. Yeah, we did lobbying. I went to Olympia several times. I didn't go back to DC, but I went to Olympia several times on the gas tax issue was probably the main thing. It seems like there are people in the state that think we don't need to build highways and state buildings and so on that get funded from the gas tax, and of course contractors think we should. So there's, the thing about Olympia and all legislation is all compromise, and is all, if one group has 51%, well, that's great, but there's always issues to trade and compromises to be made, and so we would go over there on a fairly regular basis and meet with legislators. And early on, Sam Guess had been chapter manager and was elected a state senator, and was a good friend of the contracting community, and then over the years we made relationships with other legislators and sometimes governors. Governor Rossellini was favorable to the industry. Some others haven't been. It just depends. But yeah, I was going over there that's a whole different world than here. You have to recognize where you are, in whose house you are. That's their house. So you respect that and operate under their rules. It isn't Spokane guys coming in making demands. I've been involved since Sam Guess was the chapter manager, so I've known all of the chapter managers and all of the safety personnel and the front desk person, the most important person in the whole place, the smile at the front desk. And it's always been first class personnel, and they've all understood that you don't just work 40 hours. You're working for contractors who work 24/7. You're going to work 24/7. You're going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. And we've always had people like that. It's been a great chapter. And I can speak also for some of the Seattle chapter as well that I've been involved with, and they're the same way. That's just a nature of AGC, and I think our chapter has always been right at the top. We've always had really, really involved people and passionate. It's like you see them and you go, what's going on? And that's all it takes. And you're going to hear what's going on. And there's always a passion with it. And from my standpoint, I mean, everybody has their own way of looking at life, but the way I look at it, and you have to have something that you really care about. If you want to get up in the morning and achieve something, you got to care about it. And they always have. That's the kind of people we've always had. Well, we went through the period where the highways were all new. It was virgin ground, building a new road or replacing an existing with a big. So you take out 2-lane road and put in 4-lane interstate. It was big jobs. That's been a big change where now it's primarily maintenance, and the heavy highway work is now not many of those big jobs anymore. And a lot of building it was a lot of office type building and downtown building. And while there's still some of that in the Seattle area, now there's a lot of things like arenas and different type structures than what we used to see even 20 years ago. And but the main infrastructure is there, and now it's a matter of maintaining and replacing. Same with underground, where in my early days was putting in a sewage treatment plant and a sewage outflow line, inflow and outflow, that was brand new. Now it's a matter of maintaining and fixing up and going, oh, well, that isn't big enough now, we need to put in a bigger one, but we still have one there. Power was huge, like I mentioned, the dams. And then it's one thing to build the dams, but then what are you going to do with all of that power? There's lines going all over the place, and the power companies and the government were amazing at how they would do that. You think about Priest Lake. There's a nice lake up there, but there was no power, and there is now power all the way up there. Somebody had to put those lines in, and the property owners didn't do that. It wasn't like, oh yeah, let's spend $10 million getting power to the cabin. Those cabins started out with wood stoves and kerosene lamps. And at some point in time, the power companies ran those lines in, and it was that way in all rural. The change in the rural Northwest as far as power, because of those dams, is something you would never think about today. I mean, you just drive along and you go by a power line, you don't think of the history of it. Power up to Mount Spokane. All of those kind of facilities didn't have power. It wasn't like God said, oh, here, have this power line. Somebody had to make that investment. And, they were, in those days, they were thinking in terms of, well, over 100 years, we'll get that paid back, getting the power rates paid in. And now what do we think about? Well, if we don't get our money back next year, I'm out of here. There's big changes that way. I think, especially since the two chapters merged during the mid-'60s, from that point on, I think the AGC has been really aware of the community. And I think a lot of the responsibility of the chapter management and the employees have to do with the entire community, not just our little construction community. And you look at the different facilities that have been built by AGC members, and it's meant a lot to the community. Hell, just the roadway structure and the building structure downtown, and and you look at the outlying and go to the Tri-Cities and what is there versus what was there, and all been built, maybe not all by AGC members, but lots of AGC members who are the awareness of the entire community. The thing is, you can go back to Maslow and just start there. In the 30s, when people were moving into this area, their main concern was eating. And as we've evolved over the years and have become more affluent and had more time on our hands and so on, we've been able to expand our horizons to look at other things. And so somebody in the 30s is going, man, and especially during the Depression when things were so bad, it was like, if I can get a job for an hour, I can feed my family. That's all I care about. I am not looking at the guy next door. Now we can look at programs, and AGC has always been involved in training. I mean, training people. Back then it was like, hey, if you don't know how to do your job, too bad, you're out of here. Now AGC has a lot of training, and nationally, AGC as well as our chapter here, that's really important to people wanting to come into the industry. I'm sure all trades are like this and to their own degree, but our trades are like, how in the hell do you do that? What's that lever for? How do I even climb up into that machine? All of that. And the safety aspect, it's like, well, okay, if you make the wrong move, you just killed the guy on the street. Well, life didn't have the same meaning in the 20s and 30s as it has now. And we're much more aware, and we place much more value. So our safety programs, I think, are second to none. We work really hard to make sure. I get this thing online, I forget what it's called, but it has all kinds of different things from different companies and what they're doing. And one of the things you see a lot of are safety comments and videos of a safety meeting and things like that. And really that didn't start until mid-60s. People started doing that, and initially it was kind of like, well, yeah, we have to do that because the government says we have to, and now it's like, well, of course, it's just part of our nature. And I think AGC has been a leader in all of that. AGC's been a leader in the entire industry. I mean, there are other associations, but AGC has been right at the forefront of all of the work and all of the programs to make the industry better, and to the degree we can, make the world we're in better. How's that? We are the AGC.